We're thrilled to have our next speaker with us today. What can we say about him? Well, he's a statistician, psychotherapist, TED Talk speaker with unique and valuable insights on the very topic that we're exploring today, well-being. Once described as a statistician with a soul because of his unusual combination of hard statistical skills even, and soft people skills. And he draws on scientific evidence to show that everyone benefits when businesses take happiness seriously. He founded Friday Pulse, an innovative tech business based in London, to be the catalyst in the changing world of work for better. He's currently working on his next book, he told me earlier on, and he's just a really nice guy. I'm looking forward to hearing from him. Please put your hands together from the creator of the 5 Ways to Wellbeing, Nic Marks.
Yeah, I'm Nic. I am a statistician, and yeah, I have done a TED Talk. This is me 2020. Obviously a bit younger. Can't really do much about that. A bit slimmer. I could do something about that. Actually, my hair's shorter there. This is my long COVID hair. I don't know, sort of. I live near Stonehenge, so I decided to grow it first, but it hasn't quite gone yet. Then my wife keeps on telling me I maybe should cut it sometimes. And I founded something called the Centre for Wellbeing at the New Economics Foundation, a think tank in London, in 2001. So yeah, that's 23 years ago, geez. And I love the word well-being, and it's a little bit more nebulous than the word happiness. Happiness, we kind of understand more exactly what we mean. So if I asked you, how is your well-being? This group might know, but most people would go, what do you quite mean by that? And they start hesitating about how they think about it. And so when I come to measuring, I particularly like using the word happiness because it resonates with us. We all understand whether we're happy or not. That is something very deeply within us as a human being. So as a statistician, I'm going to get more robust measurement when I start asking about happiness than I would about well-being. I would say the same about engagement. Engagement ultimately is a kind of made-up management word. And in its worst, it's like just a code word for productivity. And it's the, like, how can we get more out of you and pay you the same money? That doesn't mean say most people are cynical like that, but it doesn't land particularly with the employee well. Whereas if you say to them, I want to make a job that you enjoy, that you're happy in, and suddenly you're doing something that's in everyone's self-interest. And that's kind of what I'm trying to do with my work. And so to give you an illustration about how powerful measurement is for happiness, I want to show you this graph, which is happiness during the pandemic in the UK. So we saw lots and lots of data about numbers of cases, hospitalizations and deaths. But unless you've heard me speak before, which some of you might have done, you probably won't have seen this data, which is about happiness during the pandemic in the UK. And if you could look at that and see that, you can see the huge dip in March 2020, which was a genuinely scary time. Of course, people were left happy. We all, I was in London that week. At the beginning of a week, the tube was full. And by Thursday, it was like down so much because people weren't coming into work anymore. I was worried about my 84-year-old mother. I was a bit worried about myself, particularly when Boris Johnson got ill. And I was thinking, God, I'm chubby like him at the same age, So, things like, so it was a genuinely scary time. And people's happiness dropped. And you can see it, rising up through to the summer. In the UK, we had the rather disastrous, by our now Prime Minister, Eat Out to Help Out. And that spread COVID even more. And we came back into lockdowns again. And that is measuring weekly happiness. It's a very, very simple question, which is just in a survey. It's run by YouGov, who for some reason started measuring it in 2019. I don't actually know the history of why they quite chose to measure it then, start measuring it then. But they started to ask it in a survey which they called the Mood of the Nation. And they're surveying a rolling survey of 2,000 people every week. So it's good data, but it's just asking people to tick a box were you happy last week or not. So it's the crudest measurement you can get, and you get an extraordinary curve like this. And actually, they've continued doing this data. So this is up to earlier this year, and you can see the ups and downs of happiness in the UK. And they're the two. That's the first COVID lockdown, and the second one was the one that we had in January, February, March. So I presume you had the same lockdown, did you? Yeah. Which I found the worst because I don't like winter anyway. And then you can see other things in the data. So you can see Christmas peaks. So little peaks every Christmas. People take time off work, get together with their family. More people are happy. You do actually see a spike in loneliness and fear is also at Christmas, because people are left behind. So it's not everybody, but you see these very big peaks in Christmas, even in the COVID lockdowns. You see end of summer blues. So, you know, at the end of every summer, you know, people in the UK, imagine Ireland too, feel less happy. You can see big events. The one on the left is Russia invading Ukraine. The one on the right is our Queen's death, and also Liz Truss's government. I don't know which one it is. I was more upset about Liz Truss's government personally, but it's in there. And actually sadness really spiked that week, because, you know, whatever we think about the royal family in the UK, she was an extraordinary woman. And I probably brought up everyone owns personal sadness, but at a national level, you have to have these huge events to see any blip at all. And COVID is obviously the biggest event that any of us have ever seen. But just notice how just asking about happiness really, really captures something very significant about it. And that's because it resonates with everybody. So the first thing I would like to say really is that happiness is a signal of what we call a good fit. It is an evolutionary signal that we are in a good environment. You know, when we're in a good environment, we feel good. You know, and happiness is more complex than that. But at a simple level, that's what it's about. You know, I sometimes say that, you know, if you're a happy frog, you stay in your pond. If you're an unhappy frog, you hop to another pond. And actually, unhappiness is a signal to change. Happiness is a signal to carry on. It's measurable. People say, oh, you know, happiness is intangible. Oh, it's fluffy. It's whatever. No, you can measure it. You can measure happiness. I mean, it's a measure. It's not happiness. It's a measure. You know, it's a number. You know, I have to use a number 1 to 5. That doesn't capture the whole richness of human happiness, but you know, it captures absolutely some of it. And it's dynamic. It's going to go up and down. In fact, it would be dysfunctional to be happy all the time, because we need those negative signals in our lives. So it's a dynamic indicator. It's a dynamic experience. And it also changes through the life course. I don't know if any of you have seen this sort of data about the shape of happiness in our lifetime. It was even on QI in the UK last week, right? And basically it shows that in our middle age, and a lot of us in this room look like we're in our middle age, we are our least happy. And this looks like a really horrifying thing. It's like, oh my God, this is the midlife crisis. It's terrible. You know, inescapable. I mean, all I can say is I'm getting old enough that I'm on the rise now, going up there. The jagged lines are actually just different surveys. This is really, it was on a little Radio 4 show about graphs that are really significant. It's promoted particularly by a guy called Andrew Oswald, another one called Danny Blanchflower. This was for the World Economic Forum, this particular piece of research, but they've been banging on about it for ages. And the reality is it's a statistical truth, but it's a really small effect that you only see in big data. So this is data from the UK Labour Force survey. And if you look at it, you can see the little U-shaped curve there, okay? This is the percentage of people that have reasonable levels of well-being. It's actually very crudely measured by a measure called life satisfaction. How satisfied are you with your life? On a 0 to 10, this is people who are 7 or over. But you can see, yeah, there's slight suppression, but basically, you know, it's 76.5% of people instead of 78.5% of people. You know, so don't worry about the midlife crisis of happiness. It is not inevitable. The variation around the mean is much bigger than the mean, you know, the changes in the mean. And only in huge population surveys do you see it. But it gets so much attention. What gets so little attention, in my opinion, is the quality of work and how much bigger an impact it is. So this is a new paper that is in press at the moment by a guy called Professor Francis Green at the UCL London. I met him to interview him for my book in January, and he said, oh, I've written this paper. You might like this. And he's basically looking at the relative effect of different things on our overall well-being in life. So the effect size. Health, I've rebased here to be 100. Health is the biggest impact on our happiness. I mean, if you're feeling unwell, you're not going to feel happy, are you? And if you've got chronic pain, you're living with chronic pain, that's going to suppress your happiness. If you're living with, you know, with other illnesses, it's going to affect you. So that is the biggest. But this is age. Yeah, it's there. This is comparing middle age to other age groups. It's there, but it's a really small effect. This is income. very crude measure of income. It's just saying, are you above the median or below the median? But that's the impact. The income absolutely impacts your happiness. Anyone that says it doesn't isn't true. It's much worse to be on very low income. In fact, if you looked at the bottom 10–20% of income, then you would see a bigger effect on this compared to the others. So income does matter. And I've left one free here, which is job quality. Job quality in his work is measured by things like autonomy, purpose, and things like that. It is about 3 or 4 times more important than income. It is about 8 times more important than age. It's getting up towards being as important to your health. If you are in a job you hate, it is going to affect your happiness in life. If you are in a job that you love, it's going to affect your happiness in life. It is probably as big a decision as the partner you marry in terms of your happiness. I haven't got data on quality of marriage. I've got data on whether I've got data on whether you're married or not. Whether you're married or not is around about is between income and age. But that's just literally, are you in a marriage or a marriage-like relationship? It is including same-sex couples. It is including people who live as a partnership. And it's in between those two, but that says nothing about the quality. But having said that, if I actually put unemployment on this, so whether you have a job or not, it's roughly the same as job quality. So being unemployed is about 3 times more important for your happiness and well-being than simply loss of income alone. When you become unemployed, you lose a structure to your life, you lose a sense of meaning, you lose relationships, all sorts of things. So work really, really matters. And in fact, I've been having a bit of not an argument, but a discussion with my publisher at the moment, my publishing agent, who says, well, Nic, I think you should write a big idea book. It's on happiness across all walks of life. And I said, no, I just want to write it about work. I want it just to be about work because people spend so much time there. Yeah, the 80–90,000 hours that they do. Actually of our sort of, our commute to work adds on to that actually. So it's probably even more than that. And work is, I kind of think, where the slump is at the moment. I mean, it's actually, if you look at young people in the workplace, I think they are less enthusiastic about work. They're not buying into the vision that I certainly had as a young man that, oh my God, I need to really do well at work, and then I'm going to buy a house, and then I'm going to do this, do that, And I think house prices, which I presume are pretty bad here in Ireland, are definitely terrible in the UK. I think climate crisis is affecting them and thinking about the future, all sorts of things are. And I think work is really, really is under a lot of pressure. And we've obviously, COVID has thrown everything up as well. But quality of work really, really matters. And that's why I chose about 10 years ago, after my TED talk, to think about work rather than just public policy. And I'm very glad it did, because look what happened to public policy in the UK after we stopped doing that. It was you've had a bit of disastrous, and I can only apologise for Brexit. I didn't vote for it. So happiness at work really, really matters. Okay, so, and I just want you all just to think about time in your working thing when you were really genuinely happy at work. If you're lucky, it's now. But just think about when you were most happy at your work. Yeah. And I imagine that you felt very energized, that you obviously loved what you're doing because you're happy at work. We're using almost the same words for it, that you're perhaps working part of a team to work on a project, something you really believe in, that you feel empowered to do your work, that you like the people you're working with, you feel respected. It's great, isn't it, when you feel happy at work? It really, when you really, really enjoy your work. Now think about a time when you were unhappy at work. We're all old enough and ugly enough to have had bad experiences. Yeah. And think about a time when you really were not enjoying your work. You were actually motivated, but you were motivated to leave rather than to work. Unhappiness is a signal to change. If we're genuinely really unhappy, we tend to move. Not always, but we tend to move. The much more dangerous place is to be just okay at work, in between them. Okay kind of isn't okay, but okay is not a signal to move. It's also not a signal to do your best work. When you've just been okay at work, yeah, it's okay. You go in, you do what's necessary, you go, and you've maybe not, Maybe there's one person you like having a cup of coffee with or whatever. But, you know, okay, it's nothing like being happy at work, is it? But it's also not like being unhappy. You know, unhappy is genuinely bad. It's one of the reasons why I always use a scale with a middle point in my scales when I'm measuring something. I always use like a 1 to 5 scale with a middle point that says okay, because okay is a soft not okay. And you can get stuck in okay in your lives. We've all probably sometimes got stuck in relationships that are okay that aren't great. We've got stuck in housing that was okay and we haven't moved. Okay, yeah, it's suboptimal. Let's just put it that way. It's not disastrous, but it's not great. And so I like to think about this in terms of how much value an employee adds over their lifetime. And this is my new way. Some of you heard me speak, I've been speaking about this about 6 months now, about how to capture the business case of why happiness at work matters. So I want you to think about a typical employee, how long they stay with an employer, and how much value they add over that time. If any of you have ever worked in marketing, you might have done something called the lifetime value of a customer. This is a little bit similar. It's the lifetime value of an employee. And the curve is going to go something like this. Before you employ somebody, if you're the employer, you have to invest in the recruitment process. That costs money. When they join, it takes some time to get up to speed, takes them time to bed in. They need training, they need whatever. And so it might be a year before a company's even broken even on a new employee. And then they add value over their lifetime. I'm not even doing anything about whether they get more productive or not. I'm just assuming they get to a job like that. You know, so it's a sort of estimation, put it that way. But in many ways, we can think about this as an average okay employee. You know, this is the sort of thing we do. But if you think about whether they're happy or not, then you get 2 lines that go like this, which is the happy employee is always adding more value at every point on that curve than the okay or the unhappy employee. You'll notice the happy employee is you're going to break even on a happy employee. This means recruitment is really, really important. Finding good fit. Happiness is a measure of good fit. Finding good fit in your recruitment process is very important. It is worth, in my opinion, investing more in the recruitment process rather than the less, because you're going to get a better employee out of it. Unhappy employee takes longer and is always adding less value than the okay employee. But of course, happiness doesn't only affect productivity, and I'll show you a piece of data later about it, a piece of research later about it. But also it affects tenure, it affects how long we stay. The unhappy person leaves longer than the happy person. And if you look at average tenure in the UK and the US, this is median for over 25-year-olds, under 25-year-olds leave quicker. We all did when we were young. People go, oh, the young leave jobs. Well, I mean, I think we all changed jobs quite a lot. We took temporary jobs, we all did. Everybody's changing jobs a bit more than 30 years ago, but it's not particularly a cohort effect. It's more that the whole population is changing more. The young have always changed jobs more than the elder. So they look like they're changing more than we did, but we're changing more than people 30 years older than us did. So the whole job market has changed in that fact. But tenure, still median tenure is 5 years. It is shorter for hospitality. It is shorter for young people. It is longer for public sector. It's longer for older people. So it varies, but the median is 5 years. So we're just going to take the median. So if we, tenure varies according to happiness. So this is a study I did with 22,000 people globally. And you can see this is actually just called intention to quit. This is in a population survey. We asked people how happy they are. We asked them whether they're likely to leave. And you can see, and this is actually people who said they were very likely to leave in the 6 months. And you can see that the unhappy are much more likely to say they will. I mean, this is in a survey, so you might say, well, that's not actually real people's behavior. This next graph is real behavior from one of our clients, 9,000 people that we were tracking. And the unhappy were about 3 times more likely to leave next quarter than the okay and the happy. Next quarter. You know, unhappiness is a signal to move, so we saw a big curve on it. This is asking a 5-point scale. So if you look at the lifetime value of employees from this perspective, you can draw a graph which goes that the okay employee adds this much value, calling it one, roughly in UK pounds, if you take median salary, median everything, average everything, that's about £100,000, very roughly. If you look at the happy employee, they stay 2 years longer, and they add 2.2 times more value than simply an okay employee. Okay is not okay. You know, this is actually for most organizations where the benefit of happiness is from. The unhappy employee is adding hardly any value. They left very quickly. But the unhappy employee is a little comic book, isn't it, in a way? And, you know, not to say that if unhappiness is not as serious, it is very serious. But in most of my data, I don't have so many people saying they're deeply unhappy at work because they've left in lots of ways. So maybe this is real. It's difficult to know precisely. But where the real benefit for most organizations is moving people from okay towards being happy. And that is much more achievable. And it's much more desirable. It's in everybody's self-interest to do that. Ultimately, if you've got a deeply unhappy employee, actually they may be disrupting other people. So, you know, so happiness at work is really important to you, and it is really valuable to your organization. There is a huge win-win in happiness at work. Huge win-win. And you can call it well-being at work if you want to as well. There is a huge win-win here. And actually, as I sort of started to say, I actually think this is an underestimate because I'm using individuals here. And so, yes, this is how we do it, but happiness is contagious. You know, people talk about radiators and drains, you know, that some people radiate this positive energy. And of course, it makes you feel good to be in someone's presence who's smiling and warm and is supportive to you. Someone who is a drain, sucking the life out of you. You know, we've all worked with them, unfortunately, you know, and, you know, I sometimes think of like Harry Potter, the Dementors, like sucking your soul out of you. And, you know, and so that really matters. People affected. You know, you will do it in your life. You know, if you feel down, you will seek out a friend who makes you feel better. We naturally seek out situations for that. It's also actually, in some studies, you see 3 degrees of contagion, which is that my happiness affects you, which affects your friend, which affects your friend. The effects get smaller. There was a large study called the Foundation Heart Study, which showed that. And so happiness moves around. And so in a closed thing like an organization, it's going to move around relatively rapidly. In fact, depressingly, the fastest moving emotion around an organization is anger. Because we feel angry on someone else's behalf very quickly. So if someone's treated unfairly, they're going to feel angry, but we feel angry on their behalf if we care about them. So anger actually moves quicker than happiness around the group. But the reason, so happiness, the fact that it's contagious, it's also social, is I think that teams really matter at work. Teams, you know, is where it is. That's the engine of growth in an organization. It's also the engine of happiness and well-being. And I think teams are, well, I think great teams are very poorly defined. If I look up, you know, in books like the Successful Teams and so on, people make very long-winded definitions of them. And I think actually we can be very simple and say great teams are happy and successful. They are both those things, you know. And I've got 2 variables there. So I'm going to draw a quadrant. And so you can have low performing teams, you can have high performing teams, and this is where great teams sit. They are happy and high performing. And that's where miserable teams sit, and nobody wants to be in a miserable team. Nobody wants miserable teams. But we've got 2 empty quadrants here. There's not a perfect correlation between happiness and performance. And this quadrant up here is what every senior leader fears about happiness, which is that if they think about happiness at work, everyone will be slacking. They won't just be, you know, having a good time. They won't be working, and it will be an absolute waste of time. Yeah, that's their fear. They've actually got many more teams down here, the burning out teams that are actually performing well, but they are not happy. They're driving performance, but they're driving people out of the business at the same time. And if I look in my data, if I think I've got it, yeah, how many teams are in each of these quadrants? Again, this is a bit difficult because how do you measure team success in a survey? What I did in the survey, because self-rated performance is notoriously bad as an indicator, because who's going to say I'm performing badly at work? They're not going to do it. So I asked a series of questions about the team, whether the team have got well-defined goals, and then I asked them, how successful are you meeting at your goals? And so I used that in order to make some psychological distance between the respondent and the success indicator. It is not a perfect indicator of success, but it's the best I can do, or the best way I've come up with it so far in a cross-sectional survey. But what you can see, and maybe there are too many in the great teams, but you can see the ratios of them. I think the ratios are about right, which is that there are about 3 times as many in the burning out teams as there are in the slacking, and there's many more in the miserable and burning out than there are in the slacking. There are slacking teams. They exist. They are something to be aware of. They're not the major problem. And they're not a problem with happiness, by the way. They're a problem with business focus. So even if you want to move people from that quadrant, you still want to think about happiness, because you don't want to shove them straight down into the burning out teams. And why don't you? Because this is staff turnover in each of those quadrants. And you can see that staff turnover is obviously worse in the miserable teams, but in the burning out teams, it's 3 times more than in the great teams. And staff turnover is a killer for lots of businesses, not necessarily public sector, but lots of businesses, staff turnover is a killer. And it costs them much more than they realize. They don't join up the dots about how much staff turnover costs them, but it does. It costs them a lot. And they might have very successful recruitment arms in their business, so they think they're doing a really great job. But if the bad managers weren't, they're driving people to distraction, driving out of business. I'll come back to managers. I don't mean to blame managers. I think they're very under-supported. But if the system is not supporting people to be good leaders, not supporting good teams, then you're going to have a real problem in that, and you're going to have a lot of cost in the business. So building great teams is a win-win. In fact, you could say it's a win-win-win almost, and this is really the purpose of my work, is to help people move into this top quadrant. How do you get teams to move up into that quadrant? And so I've created a model. I call it the dynamic model of team happiness, because it's a very dynamic space, and I've got happy teams in the middle. And I also, when I do my measurement, I like to group it into groups rather than look at individuals, particularly when I'm feeding back to organizations. So teams are at the middle of it. And as a statistician, I like to think about outcomes and drivers separately. So I like to think about what are the drivers of happy teams and what are the outcomes of happy teams. So in this way, happy teams I think of as both an outcome. It's an outcome of the drivers of happy teams, but it's also a driver of business success. And this is a very dynamic space. So you can see I put the main flow from left to right, drivers leading to happy teams, leading to successes. But there is a route that goes the other way. So successes lead to happiness. So just thinking of my next slide. Oh yeah, I know what's in. I know what's in. I'll come back to that thing. So the successes will build the happiness. So if you like we get a sense of happiness from our accomplishments at work. So that's going to build it. But actually, in the data I look at, the pathway from happiness to successful outcomes is twice as strong as the pathway from successful outcomes back to happiness. So they both exist. So you've got a great virtuous cycle that you can unlock there, but it's twice as strong that way. So the arrows are bigger that way. Now, just to give you an indication about why I like to have drivers and outcomes separately, is that you can answer good empirical questions with it. So think about who is more unhappy, an employee who's stressed or an employee who's bored. Who thinks it's stressed? Employee who's going to be least happy. Who thinks it's bored? More of you. An empirical question. You'll be pleased to know you're going to be right. But you can create variables. So stress, and you could sometimes in the tech world I talk about this as friction at work. What's getting in your way. You can think about interest. You can think about it as flow. Interest is the opposite of boredom. And then we can look at the relationship between these. We can look at this in linear regressions. Actually, this is just a simple linear regression. If you're doing something more complicated, you can do structural equation modeling or something. But basically, the beta value from stress to happiness at work is 0.14. What does the beta value mean? Well, if you've got a 5-point scale, It means that a 1 point change in stress will cause, on average, a 0.14 change in happiness. So it's an effect, but you can see it's not a very big effect. Whereas interest stress is a 0.61 effectively. So it's about 4 times more important for happiness than stress. That doesn't mean stress is unimportant. You can see it's a negative effect, and stress can definitely affect us. It's a part of burnout. And often stress is about, so if it's a long-term burning out stress, that's very different. But if it's a short-term stress, it's like, the normal stresses, there's things that we can do about that for ourselves. So this is a tip for dealing with short-term stress. And you're thinking, what on earth has he got a picture of 2 people smoking there? Well, and I think smokers, obviously, long-term health risk, carcinogens, but they do something very amazing about dealing with short-term stress. Many of you would have been smokers. Some of you may still be, or you may vape. But what smokers can teach us about dealing with stress is to think about what they do when they get stressed. It's the first thing, they stop what they are doing. Yeah. The second thing they do is they move their bodies. Really good way of starting to deal with stress. The third thing to do is they go, outside. Notice how I'm building up letters here. So they go outside, which a bit shame they decided to pollute that with smoke, but going outside, seeing the sky is really, really good for our short-term and our long-term well-being. Now you're thinking, how does he get a K into this? Yeah, okay. Well, they kickstart conversations with other people. So they kickstart conversations with other people. And I used to be, when I was a student, I was never a smoker. It was a disgust thing for me. I just didn't like it. But I used to be jealous that smokers would just start conversations really easily. I mean, guys would go up to girls and just say, "Have you got a light?" It's like such a simple way to open up a conversation. And what do I say? Do you want some crisps? I mean, it just didn't really work, did it? So they kickstart conversations, and that's very, very good for our happiness and well-being. And then they do something that I really think they're unaware of with smoking, which is they exhale for longer than they inhale. If you see someone really enjoying a cigarette, they look in slight bliss, don't they? And maybe you've experienced that bliss when you've been smoking, but it's in and it's out. And we know that mindful breathing is breathing out for longer than you breathe in. You breathe in and then you breathe out longer. And that relaxes us. Why does it relax us? Well, it's a deep evolutionary signal that we are safe. If you've been running away from a predator, and then you get to your cave and you stop, then your breathing pattern all changes, and you can take the breath, you can recover the oxygen. So it tells the brain that you are safe if you do mindful breathing. And it is an extraordinary way of de-stressing yourself, and of course you can do it without smoking a cigarette. And they relax, and that spells smoker. So next time you get short-term stress, think what a smoker would do. And I'm saying this, this is actually really good to do on an hourly basis, getting up, they say sitting is the new smoking. Well, it's not quite as bad as smoking. Smoking is still really bad. Smoke more than 15 cigarettes a day. Yeah, it's the top suppression of life expectancy. Equal, by the way, with loneliness. Loneliness is coming through in all the data as bad as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. As bad. Loneliness is really, really bad. And I just think we actually have a society which is pretty bad at dealing with loneliness. And we should think a lot more about loneliness in society. But that's a slight aside. But this is your advice and of course you don't have to smoke. You can go and float paper airplanes or something like that. And in fact, you should not smoke. But of course, that's your choice. Unless you're in the UK and under 15, in which case it won't be your choice because it's going to be banned forever, which is an interesting policy thing, which I probably approve of. Anyway, so you don't need to smoke, but it's a good way of dealing with stress. So going back to the dynamic model, we've got the drivers, we've got the outcomes, and I talk about there being 5 ways to happy teams and there being 7 successes of them. I'm obviously going for alliterations here, but the 5 ways, so some of you may know me from my work 15 years ago on the 5 ways to well-being, which were very widely adopted in public health settings. Was one of the greatest pleasures of my career designing those. It was a tiny project for the Government Office of Science. It was literally a £9,000 project to do some messaging, and they absolutely flew, and they still resonate today. And I know all sorts of tricks behind the design. They were quite deliberately designed. to be so that anybody could use them, and that they could be and they were sort of almost point to what universal things you could do. And so when I got into the work, I've obviously picked up that same trick and placed it here. So let's look at them. So when I talk about the drivers, I talk about them being connect, which shares it with the original 5 ways, but we're talking about a system, we're talking about teams. So there's fairness. We need to think about how people are treated, whether they're treated fairly, whether they're empowered, whether they're challenged, and whether they're inspired. And you can think about those as psychological constructs. So those of you that have done psychology, you think about connect as relatedness, it's relationships. We know relationships are really, really important for our well-being. As I just said, the absence of them, loneliness, is really bad. Justice is really important in a system, you know, and if you get into it deeply, it's not just justice of outcomes, it's justice of process. Actually, it matters hugely. Autonomy would be what you call empower. Challenge you might call development. Competence might be. Inspire is sort of meaning. Why do I use the other words? It's just kind of easier to use, to think about. A team leader can think, oh, how do I empower somebody? You know, how do I inspire them? You know, rather than thinking about how do I make their work more meaningful. You know, it's also the reason why I prefer happiness than well-being. It's more the language that people use, trying to put it into simple things that people can do. So, you know, if a client comes to us and they want to define their values, I say, well, look at these. Are your values meeting these at least? You know, you might have other values on top of that. It might be around whatever it is, you know, sustainability or whatever. But do include, if you want to think about the well-being and happiness of your employees, you've got to cover this sort of space. You know, and you can see lots of theories in there. You can see Maslow in there, if you like, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, though even he took down the hierarchy at the end of his career. You can see, if any of you know, self-determination theory, which is relatedness, autonomy and competence, that's there. Daniel Pink, if you're into drive, you know, it's the last 3. If you like PERMA, which is a model by Martin Seligman. You can see it there, though. I am a critic of PERMA. He has mixed means and ends there. He has mixed outcomes and processes. Positive emotions are effectively the outcome. They're not a part of the process. So PERMA mixes, and so for me fails as a model because it's not distinguished between drivers and outcomes. While I'm there, Gallup Q12, if any of you use that, Gallup talks about engagement. That's just drivers. It's got no outcome measure. So you have to take Gallup's word that these 12 questions lead to engagement because you've got no separate indicator of engagement. In my data, I can look at the relationship between all these and happiness, and I can see it changes from organization to organization, to sector to sector. The correlation coefficients are going to be different. They're going to be different drivers in different circumstances. And you can only identify those differences if you have a separate measure of drivers and outcomes. You need the 2 things. So measuring the drivers of happiness at work, you know, I'm a measurement guy, so designed a questionnaire. So I have 3 questions on each, very pragmatic here. 3 is the shortest scale that you can have to measure one construct in psychology. Think of a 3-item scale. Psychologists love to have really long scales because they think it creates more internal robustness. It does statistically, but it also creates fatigue in the answers. So you actually get less quality answers as the questionnaire gets longer and longer. Businesses are hugely pressured. Everybody wants short questionnaires. Okay, so this for me is the shortest questionnaire on identifying drivers of happiness at work. So, don't know why my look more beautiful when I lost its but don't worry. Anyways, 3 things. And you can basically see that these 15 questions are fleshing out each of those. And if you want to see this questionnaire, you can go to a website called friday1.com and you can take a free happiness test for yourself. And because my models, I try and get them to resonate at an individual, a team, and an organizational level, it makes perfect sense for an individual to do this and get feedback on how happy they are at work now. And I think of my indicators in this way as a bit like a mirror. They're showing you where you are. And you need to know where you start. Everywhere, you know, you need to know where you start. So you can do that and see that. But then what are the outcomes of making happy teams? Well, happy teams, I mean, some of you will be team leaders. Some of you have had experience of leading teams. It's blooming miserable leading an unhappy team. I mean, that is no fun at all. So leading a happy team is great for a team leader. And I talk about happy teams, they are stable. You know, they haven't got conflict going on all the time. They haven't got people leaving. There's a stability in them. That's fantastic. They are energetic. You know, if you're burning out, you've got no energy. If you're not feeling happy, you haven't got energy. They are collaborative. We collaborate better with people that we like, the people we get on with, the people who respect us. They're more creative. They're more attractive. I don't mean they're better looking, though maybe they are, but they attract things towards them. You know, they're going to attract support. You know, IT is going to support you more if they like you. HR is going to support you more. We're natural human beings. We obviously do things. You're going to attract customers to you, clients, suppliers, if you're a good functional team. You're more effective, you're productive, whatever it is, or higher customer satisfaction, whatever your measure wants to be. And ultimately, you're more profitable. You're adding value like that first graph. And that's going to lead to happiness as well. So the 7 successes, lots of data on this, but, you know, let's just run through it quickly. Unhappy teams have 3.5 times higher staff turnover. Unhappy people are 3 times more likely to feel burnt out, take at least twice as many sick day leaves. They're more collaborative. They're twice as likely to collaborate with other teams in the organization. They're more creative. They're 4 more times likely to find creative solutions. A really big one, that when you're in a positive mood, you see the bigger picture more. You see how things fit together more. You can imagine things. If you're unhappy, you're closed, you're narrow, you're in your internal world. When you're positive, you can reach out, you can see things better. For creativity and innovation, it's a massive effect. They're more attractive. I mean, this is a fairly crude indicator, but it's basically employee net promoter score. How much would you recommend this organization, someone else to work with, but they will be your brand ambassadors for you. Effective is they're over 20% more productive, and profitable is that actually businesses that have good cultures have got at least 3% extra share price growth. You can think of those in business outcomes. You know, if you want to, lower staff turnover, less sickness absence, more integration in the business, more innovation, more talent attraction, more productivity, more share price growth. These are goodies. Everything is working together. There is an alignment between my personal happiness, between my team's functionality, and between the organization. So actually to shareholders, and you can even make a case it's good for society, because obviously people who are happy at work are less sick, less strains on the health services, and all sorts of other things. I want to show you my favorite piece of research. So I'm going to go into one bit of research in a bit more detail. So this has been emerging as a piece of research for a long time. They started it over 7 years ago. It is led by Professor John Emmanuel Denise from Oxford University. And it is, for me, a brilliantly designed study. It's taken them a long time to publish because they're trying to nail down the elusive golden vision. I don't know, I haven't got the right word, but the holy grail, that's the word I want, of happiness research, which is to prove causality, to prove it, because so many things are indicative of it and they're not actually proof. So what they did was they studied 1,700 BT, British Telecom, call operators. These are people in basically the modern sweatshop, which is, you know, call center. There's absolutely no teamwork in this, so that's interesting. But it actually becomes great from a statistical perspective, because you don't have to worry about the reverberation around a group, because these people are just dealing with a call on the phone. They measured happiness and sales weekly, so they've got a pretty good measure of their mood. You're not asking them daily, which might be even better, but weekly is really good. So they also had a spread across the UK. So that's going to become important in a minute. So they had a spread of call centers across the UK. 90% of the calls were inbound. So there's no prospecting. There's no salespeople going out and reaching people. Even the 10% outbound are normally callbacks. So you've got people aren't using their initiative to find the customer in any way at all, which of course a salesperson normally does, and therefore going to have a bigger effect. And happiness is measured weekly. So they did it on a scale like this, which is very similar to one I use. You know, overall, well, how happy were you this week? They're using the emojis. You know, I tend to put happy at work this week, but they were just asking them how happy they were. I don't think I've got the data here. No, but all I can say is they're a pretty miserable lot in this stuff. Because when I looked at the data, I was like, really, that many people unhappy in a week? You know, in my data, you know, I get, you know, 20% of people unhappy. They had like 45% of people who were unhappy. every week, so it's pretty miserable. Okay, but you know, it's a low paid job. It's not a great job in any way. They looked at the difference in sales by happiness level, and basically they found a 13% difference in sales. That is a relatively small effect in the research, but think about it, it's just their tone of voice on the call, and it's having this effect. This is this is really tightly defined, and they could also see that was between operators. That was saying comparing the happy to the unhappy. This is within the same operator. They were tracking them for 30 weeks, so they could see weeks when they were happy and weeks when they weren't. And they basically showed that the weeks that they were happier, this individual was selling more. Right. So if an individual changes, that is still not a proof of causality, by the way. And the reason is that, you know, if they became happier, they sold more. But, you know, we don't know if happiness is driving sales or sales is driving happiness, because it's within the same week. So, and they rather brilliantly, they looked at the British weather, and so you have a lot of variability. Maybe you have less variability than us, actually, because, you know, we've got from Truro to Glasgow or whatever. But the sun shines 30% more in Cornwall than it does in Scotland on average year. Of course, it can change every day, but it changed every day. So what they were looking for was, does the sunshine make people happier, and does that lead to more sales? With British, I guess it's the same with you in Ireland. We talk about the weather obsessively. It affects us a lot. If you're in India, you wouldn't get this effect because it's sunny every day, you know, and they hate it. That's just when it gets too hot, you know. But this causal pathway, if they can show evidence this is a causal pathway, and of course they did, and they basically showed that that when it was sunnier, people became happier and they sold more. You can't go the other way around with that. You know, however happy I am, I can't make the sunshine. You know, and however much I want to be a druid and, you know, pray for sun, whatever, it doesn't work. Okay. And so basically that's a proof. But actually there is just one other possibility, which is that the sun could be making the customers happier and they could be buying more. But because there's a spread over the whole country, customers were routed sort of randomly to any one. So they could look at the weather where the customer was. Well, actually, no, they didn't look. They looked at the weather generally in the UK that day because they actually didn't know the geographical location of the customer. And they looked at the specific weather on that day. And basically, it was the local weather that was driving the results, not the national weather. And that is the first peer-reviewed paper ever accepted for publication on the causal link between happiness and productivity in sales. And they deserve a lot of credit for that paper. However, it's still not telling us why they're selling more. It's still just observing that when you're happier, you're selling more. So what actually is psychologically going on there? And they have this slightly more speculative part of the paper, which I think is just as genius. I think John Emmanuel and George Ward, who are two of the lead, are absolutely excellent wellbeing researchers out there. But they looked at why. And to do this, they looked at the types of call that people were taking. And they had categories of calls. So they had simple order taking. They had more complicated contracts. And then they had recontracting, which is basically unhappy customers ringing up with something that's a problem. And notice the increasing complexity of those calls. So, and what they found was that there was absolutely no impact of happiness on the routine calls. None at all. You're ringing in, can I order this? Can I, you know, have this internet connection? Can I have this? Thank you very much. Blah, 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 blah. Pay. Boom. No impact of the mood. Positivity helps us deal with complexity. It helps when things are simple, doesn't matter so much. When things get complex, how you feel matters more and more. The more complex a role, the more creative a role, the more you need to sort of go off script, which is what I say here, which is that, you know, positive operators could go off script. Literally, they weren't following a script. They suddenly had to get into the moment. They were able to see the customer's point of view. Very important step in empathy is to put yourself in the other person's shoes. It's called mentalizing in psychology. We start learning as a toddler that someone else has a different point of view. It's a skill we keep developing right up into our 20s as we mature. We see more and more maturation go on and people go to mentalize. They can de-escalate situations. You know, when we are angry ourselves, we escalate a situation. We all know this with our partners. You know, if one of us gets angry, if the other one does too, it goes pretty nuclear pretty quickly. What does with my wife anyway. But if we can, one of us can stay calm, well, it can de-escalate quite quickly. Yeah. And so, you know, so they can de-escalate situations and they can problem solve with them. Effectively, they get into their point of view. They can solve the customer's problem. Like, you know, you might not have customers, whatever, but we have to work with other people and see them from their point of view. And ultimately, they find a solution. In this case, it's make a sale. But all of those are applicable to nearly every job you can think of that you need to do. Positivity is helping us deal with complexity. The world is complex, it is fast moving, and we need to, the more that we feel good, the more we can roll with that, the more we can make the best of it. And if you look at these 7 successes, it's particularly picking up the collaborative, even though it's not teamwork, but they're collaborating with the customer, they're being creative, they're problem solving with it, and effectively they're being more effective, yeah, that's my favorite research. And I think it really, really shows why happiness is really, really important. It gets into the nitty gritty of it as well as showing the causality. So the next question and my final point, yeah, is that how do you build happy teams? And firstly, what not to do, ping pong and pizza. Really, I mean, you can do that if you want. It's fun. I like ping pong. I like pizza. Parties also don't. This is one of our clients having a party. Lasts a week. You know, everyone enjoys a party. Actually, this is a really good client. You can see they're in the green all of the time. But, you know, parties are not going to do it. So, you know, the boss that wants to have a party at Christmas and thinks that's dealing with team happiness, they're not. They're just, you know, making a blip. Individual interventions have very little impact. This is rather distressing for lots of wellbeing programs. But basically, a big survey, 28,000 people, showed, again, it's by John Emmanuel Deneve's group. It's by a guy called William Fleming. Basically, this is a slightly complex graph, but it's showing all of the programs they did. This, if it had a 0 on the Z score, that would mean it had no impact. I'm going to show you something which looks like this. The X is marking the mean. The whispers are marking the standard deviation. You need all of the whispers to one side or the other side of the graph to have a statistically significant result. And you look at that, and they're basically none of them really making an impact, except this one, which is volunteering, which is like getting out of the organization and doing something else. So that's not really helpful to workplace well-being, but it does have a positive effect on people's happiness and well-being. Look at that one up there. Resilience training has a negative impact on people's well-being. It's sort of me, I think it's slightly disrespectful to like stress the hell out of people and say, we'll make you resilient and then you'll be okay. We'll give you a training on it. Yeah, we'll stress you, give you a training. So basically, I think people find it disrespectful. And there's lots, I don't mean to bash Martin Seligman too much, or maybe a bit, but the Penn Resilience Program has failed with in the US Army, invested $500 million in it. The soldier mental fitness, it hasn't worked in any way, has not tipped any indicators such as veteran suicide or anything. And they've invested a lot in it. And as soon as they made it voluntary, none of the soldiers would go. So what does that mean? It means that interventions need to be social and systematic. And intervention should be too, which is what I'm saying here. That's the aim. Forget this. What qualities does the leadership need to build a great team? Team leaders really, really matter. This is a study by Google. Google had a plan that they were going to basically show managers were not needed, and they found exactly the opposite. So they created the project in 2008 when they were still growing. There were less than 1,000 people, and they found 10 key attributes of a senior leader, and they were a good coach, empowers the team, creates an inclusive environment. All of these things, right? I'm going to highlight these ones. These are all soft people skills, all soft people skills. So the most important skills for a team leader are the so-called soft. Let's not call them soft, let's call them essential. These are the essential skills of a team leader. Coach is most important, empowering, creating inclusive environment, good communicator, supports, bring career development, collaborate. There are some technical ones there, but even in Google, the technical ones are low. Even in Google, the technical ones are low. So why are people promoted for technical skills? Why are they promoted for length of service? If you want to put people in management roles, people skills are the most essential. Find other career paths. Let your technical people earn masses more money if they're delivering value to them, and let them sit on their own or whatever it is, or work in a team. But if you've got great technical people, don't lose them. They're worth a lot to you. Just don't get them to manage other people, because you'll destroy the other people. What are the biggest blocks? Lack of training, and I haven't got the time. Time pressure is massively important for people. So it needs to be simple, systematic, social, and simple. So the first step is understanding how teams feel and what their challenges are. And so I would suggest that you use the 5 ways. Use a survey like this to identify what is going on. That mirror, you need to look in the mirror. You need to see how you are as a team, as an organization. I call the process measure, meet, repeat. Start with the measurements, meet, make decisions, repeat it. Because life changes very, very quickly. And complete this 5-minute questionnaire, review the results, identify areas for improvement, repeat the process, making the positive changes, going round that cycle. You can think of it as an action learning cycle. You can think of it as well, I'll do an action learning cycle, but basically, you're going around and doing stuff again. It's a feedback loop. You're bringing in the information. Instant reporting, overviews. Okay, but just to give a plug to what we do, we've got a special offer coming, which is that the first measure is free. So the process we define is measure, meet, repeat. We can't do the meet for you, but we can do the first measure for you absolutely free. You can decide it, and then if you want to repeat, obviously we want it to become a client. But if you want to do that, you can do that in an organization up to 500 people for free. It's coming in June, that offer. But if you want to know when it gets released, you can link with me on LinkedIn. Please link with me on LinkedIn anyway, and sign up to our newsletter, which is at the bottom of our page on our website. Being even more systematic is you can get into people's weekly work, and we have a tool which is about a weekly happiness. So you get a weekly measure of that happiness that's always going up and down. So it just works like this. How happy were you at work this week? And you see time trends instead of like this. You see them looking like this for your organization, for your team. What's going on in them? What are the setbacks? How are they recovering? You then meet as a team, and that's the bit that our clients most struggle with sometimes, is that then they struggle to get a weekly team meeting going. So we try and make it as easy as possible for them, which is we create a slide deck of all their results in a week. So a team leader should always know how their team is doing. A good team leader would do this absolutely naturally, but celebrate, build on the positives, tackle any of the negatives in a week. So it's friction and flow, like the interest and stress I showed you. Those are the 2 most important drivers for weekly happiness. Is, can you progress your work? Are you not stuck on anything? Then the culture comes into the whole part of it. So that's a measure, meet, repeat. So just to summarize, happiness is a sign of good fits. It's measurable, it's dynamic, it's important to you, it's valuable to your organization, it is contagious, it is critical for building great teams. And the dynamic model has the 5 ways to happiness, the 7 successes, separates out outcome drivers from outcomes. You can do the free happiness test at friday1.com. Ultimately, someone said it in your Masters of Leadership and Workplace Wellbeing. Is that what it's called? Videos, your 2 talks. She said, what gets measured gets managed. First measure free, measure, meet, repeat. Friday Podcast Hub. Thank you very much indeed. Follow me on LinkedIn. Thank you.